In front of Twilight, who was astonished by the unexpected situation, Luminous's eyes opened. Her face was very beautiful. Twilight felt a sense of incongruity, but immediately realized the reason. Luminous had grown slightly taller. Her cherry blossom-colored lips parted slightly, revealing a glimpse of pure white fangs, and her lovely voice announced a cruel reality. The experiment is a success. I have remembered everything. Luminous lifted her face and said so. Her eye colors remained heterochromatic. However, there was a slight change. Inside the crimson cornea, a blue pupil asserted its presence, while conversely, inside the azure cornea, the crimson pupil radiated a distinct brilliance. It was almost the same as before, but it felt more chaotic. The change wasn't just in the color of her eyes. Her aura, too, was like that of a different person compared to moments ago. The aura being released was different. The current Luminous clearly had an increased presence. You are. Can even you not understand? Luminous arrogantly asked Twilight, but could not hide his agitation after losing the Divine Ancestor's blood spear. Twilight didn't even understand the meaning of the question. What are you talking about? Very well. I shall lecture you so that even someone as dense as you can understand. Luminous said this as if pitying Twilight. Then she continued, beginning her explanation. What is the most important element that forms a personality? That would be the soul. To be more precise, the heart core and memories. Luminous nodded. To an onlooker, they looked like a master and disciple. Before anyone knew it, the composition had become one where their positions were reversed. When a person dies, the soul disperses and vanishes. Some enter the cycle of reincarnation, some suffer torture by demons in the underworld, and some attain enlightenment, or in other words, sublimate. What is common to all is that if the shape of the soul cannot be maintained, that is death, leading to nothingness. So, I thought about it. About the definition of death and eternal life. We are long-lived species, aren't we? Why worry about eternal life when we have lifespans equal to infinity in the first place? Luminous directed an exasperated look at the irritated Twilight. Then, she asked the next question. Based on what you just said, I am convinced. You really do not remember, do you? No, never mind. Returning to the topic. Luminous no longer feared Twilight. That atmosphere was conveyed to Twilight as well, who was going along with the conversation with Luminous while feeling perplexed. She should have been an opponent he could defeat in an instant if he used force. However, the current Luminous was somehow eerie, and Twilight's instincts were telling him that he should listen properly. Luminous spoke. What is immortality? It is the continuous maintenance of the current personality, is it not? That's right. Even if the soul is inherited in the same state, if memories are lost and one has died in different thoughts, I don't think they can be considered a completely identical existence. Among long-lived species, many forget the past, correct? Memory loss can happen to anyone, and one might remember by reading documents. Although rare, there are confirmed cases where reincarnated individuals with the same soul remember their past lives. If they match to a certain extent, it can be ignored. That is indeed a matter of degree. In the extreme, even without memories. Exactly. Until now, I also thought that even if memories were lost, if the soul was inherited in the same state, it should be recognized as the same individual. However, I was wrong. Think of the true dragons. They are immortal, but their mechanism is not perfect, is it? Luminous pointed out that this very fact was a negation of immortality. That was it. Luminous had arrived at this question because she had observed Valdor being destroyed over and over again. True dragons are immortal, yet every time they were reborn, their personality was reset. There were gaps in their memories, but was it the result of some malfunction during reincarnation? In any case, it was clear that there were some problems even with the reincarnation of true dragons. What is important is the complete protection of the soul. I agree with that opinion, but then what is the correct answer? The conclusion Twilight had reached was to become a monas, an information life form, and dwell within an immortal existence like a true dragon. However, relying on others made it hard to call it perfect. That was why he had prepared numerous backups, but even so, it was undeniable that their performance was inferior compared to a pseudo-dragon body. Luminous answered. If it is the parallel existence that Valgrand excels at, one might be able to claim to be an eternal and immortal existence, by completely synchronizing separate bodies where all are the main body. Luminous's opinion was that this was the best possible solution. Only if one can interfere with information particles, can memory and personality be completely synchronized, transcending time and space. If the vessel known as the soul is distributed in the smallest divisible units, one can prepare as many separate bodies, that are the main body itself, as there are units. With this method, separate bodies one cannot draw out the maximum peak performance of the integrated main body, but in terms of safety, it is invincible. It could be said that practically, there is no worry of being destroyed. Therefore, Luminous asserted. Unless prepared in advance, there is no complete regeneration other than this method. In other words, Twilight, you too are incomplete. Hearing this, Twilight clicked his tongue in displeasure. Tisk, what an insolent fellow. He spat out those words and glared at Luminous with annoyance. In the end, were you just trying to confuse me with bluffs? I was observing to see if you would pull any underhanded tricks, but I never thought you would rely only on your tongue. It makes me sad to think this is my greatest masterpiece, Twilight mocked Luminous. Yet, Luminous paid it no mind. The pitiful one is you. Luminous said this, beckoning Twilight as if to provoke him. I shall teach you the cruel truth not with words, but with my fists. That way, even a fool like you should understand. That boast irritated Twilight even further. Due to years of experience, his emotions did not waver even when angry. Emotion and reason were separated. That was Twilight's strength, and the secret to his power. Therefore, this time as well, while enraged by the humiliation of being looked down upon by his own creation, his actions were calm. He extended his hand, dropped his hips low, kicked the ground, and charged forward as if gliding. Closing the distance between them to 0 in an instant, he slipped into her guard, and aimed to destroy her vitals with a spear hand that had turned into a cannonball. For Luminous, her vital point was the vessel imitating a soul that Twilight had used as the core during her creation. If I destroy this, Luminous will perish. As the creator, Twilight possessed an intimate knowledge of Luminous's anatomy. He could pinpoint even the location of the soul usually in uncertainty as clearly as if he were holding it in his hand. It really is a shame, Luminous. I thought you, of all people, would serve as my right hand until the very end. Twilight thought this, convinced of his victory. However, that was nothing more than premature arrogance. I knew you would attempt that. Luminous's body had been impaled by Twilight. Yet, with total composure, she grabbed Twilight's hand and spoke those words. Luminous tightened her grip. A sickening crunch echoed as Twilight's arm was crushed. Wah! The segment of the arm protruding from Luminous's back fell to the ground with a wet thud. In its wake, Luminous stood there as if nothing had happened. There were no tears in her clothes. Her demeanor was truly elegant. Twilight was stunned. He felt no pain from the severed arm, and regeneration would be simple. Yet, instead of doing so, he leapt back to put distance between himself and Luminous, standing there in dumbfounded silence. His understanding could not keep up with the current situation. He possessed all information regarding Luminous, his own work. Even after Twilight had been sealed, she had continued her self-improvement, raising her skill level and acquiring numerous authorities, but even those changes were supposed to be transmitted to him. That, too, was his privilege as the creator. Impossible. How? Why am I taking damage? Twilight could not hide his agitation at an event that absolutely should not have occurred. In contrast, Luminous was completely at ease. Is it not obvious? I have already remembered everything. Remembered, you say? Indeed. The information preserved within your spear of the divine ancestor, origin blood, allowed me to recall everything, even my missing memories. Specifically, that I am the genuine article Luminous Twilight Valentine. Luminous stated this matter-of-factly. As if it were the absolute truth. Don't be ridiculous. Twilight muttered blankly. He wanted to deny it from the bottom of his heart, but for some reason, he could not. The Luminous before him was silence personified. She emitted no fierce aura, simply gazing quietly at Twilight. Her demeanor was that of a researcher. She directed a cold gaze toward Twilight, as if observing a test subject. Don't screw with me. I am the real one. Wrong. You are certainly Twilight, but you are not complete. Your lack of memory regarding the crucial parts is proof of that. Luminous declared. The heart core dwells within the soul. And what forms the heart core are memories and personality. So, I pondered. If I were to separate memory and personality to create distinct individuals, which one would become the original? As I stated before, the resurrection of the true dragons is incomplete. Therefore, one could say that reproducing only memories is meaningless. Reproducing memories reproduce skill levels and authorities. In that case, what would happen if only the personality were reproduced? The answer to that was Luminous. Luminous gained an unyielding will, mimicking the divine ancestor's character. Lacking the skill level and authorities, she was inferior in power. However, her presence was that of the ancestor itself, displaying a charisma that overwhelmed others. Though the direction was different, Luminous was also a successor to the ancestor. And now, even the lost memories had been reproduced within such a Luminous. The result was the regeneration of the true divine ancestor, the resurrection of Luminous Twilight Valentine. Had her memories not returned, Luminous would likely have continued to exist solely as the successor of the personality, without the self-awareness of being the divine ancestor. But that is a hypothetical story. By gaining the memories in an unintended way, the divine ancestor achieved a magnificent resurrection in the perfect form intended before the experiment. Though since she performed the experiment of her own volition, failing to resurrect would have been her own fault, but that, too, was a hypothetical. As Twilight refused to accept reality, Luminous continued her explanation. As the divine ancestor, I prepared an experimental body into which I transplanted only my personality, just as I created the other high disciples. That is me. You're the one who lost the original personality, but it seems you lost a few memories in the process as well. Even if he inherited the divine ancestor's body and memories, he is undoubtedly an experimental subject, so says Luminous. Though she was speaking about herself, Luminous felt as though she were talking about a slightly different person. Because she awakened later than Jahel, she was thought to be the second high disciple of the ancestor, but in reality, Luminous was the first experimental subject. To use even oneself as experimental material, the divine ancestor's mad intellectual curiosity was genuine. Even Luminous, having fully reproduced the person's memories, had to admit this fact. In other words, the real divine ancestor vanished the moment the personality was transplanted into Luminous. All that remained were two experimental subjects. Twilight's body belonged to the ancestor, but he could hardly be called the complete ancestor. This was Luminous's claim and the truth. I will acknowledge that you are a successor to the divine ancestor. However, you are not the person themselves. Of course, I also feel that I am the divine ancestor, but we are not strictly the exact same existence. The memories feel somewhat like someone else's affairs, and eventually, I will likely be integrated into my daughter, no, into me. Just as Luminous has memory gaps, so does Twilight. Luminous was made to inherit only the personality by the hand of the ancestor. And the body that lost the original personality is Twilight. This succession experiment saw repeated failures. Then, the divine ancestor, Luminous Twilight Valentine, thought of bequeathing her own true name. By naming the experimental subject Soul Luminous, the transfer of the personality succeeded magnificently. However, in doing so, it took the form of stealing a portion of the ancestor's memories. Twilight Valentine had the memories before and after the experiment wiped away, leaving only the memory of success. Therefore, I can assert that you are incomplete, Luminous concluded. There was no way he could accept this. Twilight's face was dyed with revulsion. You're the real one. And I'm the fake. I won't accept such a ridiculous story. Well, you aren't exactly a complete fake either. Stop with the sophistry. Enraged, Twilight fired a magic bullet at Luminous, driven by raw emotion. At a glance, it was just a high-density mass of energy fired with brute force. However, woven into it was the secret art of one claiming to be the divine ancestor. It moved at Twilight's will, transforming into chains to seal Luminous. Having captured Luminous, Twilight played his trump card. The ultimate secret technique that invites the target to a place from which no one can ever escape. Wherever you are, it doesn't matter. You can rot forever in my world. Eternal Twilight. Twilight's heterochromia eyes shone with malice as he spoke the name of the technique. It was akin to a declaration of victory. Through the ultimate eternal recurrence of the ultimate skill evil King Angraminu, Luminous's fate seemed sealed. But, however, have I not already inherited the memories regarding the ultimate skill evil King Angraminu? Knowledge is power. No matter how atrocious the technique, there is no reason I cannot counter it. Luminous said this as if it were nothing. In fact, Twilight's eternal twilight dissipated into mist. Twilight was speechless at the phenomenon. As if thinking it must be some mistake, Twilight launched Eternal Twilight again. However, everything was reality. It is useless, Luminous spat out. The moment I recalled my memories, my ultimate skill lustful King Asmodus evolved. To better exercise God's authority, it has reached the state of the ultimate skill good light King Hermaza. What did you say? Since this is an authority that pairs with your ultimate skill evil King Angraminu, it is easy to nullify all your techniques. Twilight was left speechless once more. He was supposed to be in a position of overwhelming superiority over Luminous, but now the tables had completely turned. Moreover, having been told he was incomplete, he had lost the mental composure to even process it. On the other hand, Luminous had no composure either. My head hurts just recalling the numerous misdeeds you have committed. To think that my experiment caused such a situation.